Well, good morning, everybody. It's my great pleasure to introduce you to this Eurometaux webinar, where we will indeed be looking today at the Omnibus package and what the metals industry should expect. For those of you that are not familiar with Eurometaux, we are the representative body of the non-ferrous metals in Brussels and across Europe. And indeed, we represent many different elements within the industry, going through from mining, refining, processing, recycling, and of course, working with downstream users of our metals. We are indeed a very strategic sector, and we are indeed very happy to be recognized as so through the Critical Raw Materials Act. And I think that we can say that this is one of the most important sectors to achieve our twin objectives of climate change mitigation and also, of course, the digitalization agenda. Today, of course, we will be looking at a very important topic, the Omnibus package, which has been the first legislative instrument that's been brought forward by the new Ursula von der Leyen Commission. And in the second term, it's quite interesting to see how we've moved from the sort of Green Deal situation into one which is focused much more on competitiveness. And I think that we can say that there's a lot of expectation on the industry side to see how the industry will be supported by policymakers, including the European Commission, to become more competitive and to safeguard our future here in Europe. Of course, we are one of the most sustainable and indeed environmentally sound sectors relating to metals across the world. And I think that we can see the great value in terms of strategic autonomy and economic security of having our sector here in Europe. I'm very happy to say that, and you'll also be happy to know, it's not going to be just me talking today. We have a lot of experts who have been happy and willing to join us today. And so in a moment, I will be handing over to Alexandra Kuksova from the European Commission, who is indeed the team leader on corporate sustainability and responsibility in DG GROW at the European Commission. And after she has given her presentation, we will be very happy to give a panel debate involving Sophie Grenard from Industrial, involving indeed Manuela Ramirez from Atlantic Copper, one of our members, and the chair of our own Responsible Sourcing Committee, and Andrei Marcu, who is the founder and executive director at the ERCST, which is one of the leading think tanks here in Europe. For you, the audience, I would like to give you just a couple of hints on how we should go forward. We do want to hear from you. We want this to be interactive, and we'd like you to propose questions to our keynote speaker and to our panelists. So please use the Q&A function. And as you can see, if you write in the Q&A, we will be able to take your questions and we will be able to pose them to the experts. I think that that's a very important element because we do want your point of view and not just ours. Please try to include your name and your organization so we know who is asking the question. We prefer it not to be anonymous. And I will remind you all that this is being recorded. As you can see, it's live, but this is a recorded webinar, and we will be using this in communications afterwards. And this is open to the general public. So people from many different sectors are taking part today. I think as time is ticking, without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Alexandra, who will give a presentation and explain what the European Commission is trying to achieve in terms of the purpose and the objectives from this first Omnibus Simplification Package, particularly looking at the CSRD and the CSDDD, which is where Alexandra has her expertise. And yes, please, thank you. Alexandra, it's a great pleasure to have you with us today. And the floor is all yours.
Thank you, and I'm very pleased to be here with you today, even though, as I mentioned to the organizer, I'm coming from DG GROW from the part of enterprises, and we are not necessarily now leading on the Omnibus, but of course we have it as a very key instrument for the simplification and also to take into account the business-driven perspective and the user-driven perspective to make something which is implementable. So I'm very pleased to be here, and I will try to explain you why the Commission is doing this, because you mentioned there was Green Deal, now we are moving more for competitiveness. So I think both things are not necessarily incompatible. I will try to present briefly the content without going too much into details, because I think you received some of the inputs also written already in the papers, and then also try to see what are the benefits at the end, where what we assume as a reduction of cost for the companies. So I will use the presentation. Just give me a second. Can you see? It's coming.
Yes, it's coming up. Everything's good, Alexandra.
So, as you mentioned, the world is changing. The technological change is accelerating. There is also trade tensions which are rising right now. Also, the geopolitical landscape has changed. So, yes, we have Green Deal objectives, which still remain our key priorities, but we need to adapt to those. This fast-moving world, and we need to make things feasible indeed to deliver those objectives which are outlined in the Green Deal, and also to ensure that the climate transition and net zero objectives are met. So we need to secure prosperity, preserve our European values, which also will depend on the capability and ability of companies to innovate and to compete globally, and of course to adapt to these new situations. And we heard from companies that 60% of them consider the administrative burden as obstacle to further investment. And for SMEs, 55% of SMEs see the administrative burden as the greatest challenge actually in their business and in their transition towards more sustainable business. So that's why our top priority for this mandate in the EU and in the Commission is the competitiveness, to enhance it. There is a vision for that, which is Competitiveness Compass, which was published beginning of the year, to ensure favorable business environment, the growth strategy, which will create good quality jobs, attract further investment, and ensure funds for the transition which we need. One of the elements of the Competitiveness Compass is focusing on the simplification of the regulations which are out there in the Commission, and recalibrating these EU rules in the manner that it also supports the growth. That's why on the 26th of February, the Commission has adopted the first Omnibus package, which is covering sustainability reporting and due diligence, and also taxonomy. At the same time, there was a proposal on CBAM and EU Invest, which was accompanied. But I will focus in this presentation only on the two elements of the sustainability reporting and due diligence. So the objective is first to remove the burden, to really on the sustainability reporting, to cut down the reporting by 25% for the large companies and by 35% for the SMEs. Besides reducing the burden and all the obstacles which I mentioned already, businesses are facing. In terms of process, I think what is really important that there are two omnibuses actually in this one omnibus package, which one is the stop the clock, what we call. So it's really omnibus, which covers sustainability reporting and due diligence. It's common for both, where we basically postpone the application of the rules by a couple of years, to give companies more time to adjust, to prepare, to have right guidelines in place for them to adapt, but also for member states to have sufficient time to transpose. I will shortly guide you through the content. So for the CSRD, so the reporting directive, there are 6 main elements. As I mentioned, one of them is to stop the clock, where basically the companies in the second and third wave of application will have additional 2 years to apply the rules. There is no change for the companies which are currently in the scope. Those are the companies which were already reporting on the NFRD, which have already been preparing and collecting data. So those who are reporting in 2025 about the financial year of 2024, there is no change. Another important change, and I think this is probably the biggest one, is the change of the scope of the CSRD. While both legislation, CSRD and CSDD, rely on the definition of large companies, there was this mismatch between the thresholds between CSDD and CSRD. And so now CSRD is trying to align with the due diligence directive and increases the employee threshold to 1,000. which means that there is a reduction of 80% of companies from from the scope. So this is probably the biggest element, because on one hand, it will limit the trickle-down effect, because less companies are in the scope, less company will be asking their business partners for data. But on the top of it, we also have additional protection of those companies which are in the value chain, and from the trickle-down effect, because there is a new thing which we called a value chain cap, or SME mid cap cap, where basically the voluntary standards which have been developed already by EFRAG originally for SMEs which were out of the scope will be used for all companies which are not in the scope as a maximum information request that large companies can ask from their business partner. This is extremely important because we heard quite a lot of complaints from the business partners, especially SMEs, who were getting thousands and thousands of information requests, not always in the same form from their business partners, and this was really something which was becoming unbearable for the smaller companies. There will be also change to the reporting standards themselves. So there is a commitment to simplify the reporting standards within 6 months after the adoption, to reduce the number of data points which should be reported about, to make it simpler. And also there is a removal of the specific sector-specific standards, because there was fear that this is somehow duplication of what companies are already anyhow reporting under general standards. So there was agreement that these standards will not be further developed. And last but not least, there is also a change in the audit and assurance, because this is something which is extremely costly. The original provisions were foreseeing that it could be the limited assurance which changed to a reasonable assurance at later date, but now this was removed. And also there is no obligation for the Commission to adopt standards for the limited assurance. So this will not be standardized. In terms of CSDD, so let me just move to CSDD. The main focus also there is stop the clock, of course. So member states will have 1 additional year for the transposition, and also the companies which were in the wave 1 of the due diligence requirements will have 1 additional year to prepare. The idea is basically that in the meanwhile, Commission will adopt guidelines. So the guidelines are advanced, so companies can properly be ready to implement these requirements. On the top of it, there is also extension of maximum harmonization of the main part of due diligence process, while at the same time some other elements are no longer harmonized, especially those where member states have their national traditions, like be it civil liability, access to remedy. So this is left more to the member states level. The same small and medium size and mid-cap enterprises shield applies. So similar to CSRD, so the companies should not ask more information from their business partners. And I think what is seen as probably the biggest change is the phase of identification or in-depth assessment, which is limited now to tier 1 level, except the situation where there is plausible information about harm in the indirect value chain. So this seems that is a little bit going away from the OECD approach of risk-based approach. This is something which was also used in the German law. I wanted to reassure you that this is not going away from the OECD approach which you are used to use, but it's actually the risk-based approach is still applied. Nothing changes in that sense, but for primarily the in-depth assessment, which is quite time-consuming, will focus on the tier 1 level. As well, there is change in the suspension. So when there is before there was obligation to terminate business relationship in case of severe adverse impact as a last resort. Now this is no longer obligation, but there is possibility still that there is still the suspension for that. There are some other elements which reduce the burden, like more on the administrative side, like the monitoring is now less frequent. Before, the monitoring had to happen in a certain periodic review. Now the obligatory periodic review is every 5 years, but anyhow, there is still the need to do this when it's necessary, when you assume that there are some changes. So it's not that only every 5 years you have to monitor your effectiveness of the measures, but it actually removes the burden when it has to be done in a periodic and obligatory manner. Also, the stakeholder engagement is now limited. Not only the definition of stakeholders is shortened, so only covering workers and their representatives and individuals and in communities, but also the stakeholder engagement only happens in 3 parts of the process: in the identification, when the company is developing action plan, and also when designing remedial measures. What was heavily criticized in the past was the climate plan and the transition plan and the non-alignment with the CSRD, while they were both actually connected, but it was not very clear from the provisions in due diligence directive. So now there is further alignment in terms of the content, and also there was a duty to put best effort to implement the transition plan in the due diligence directive, which is now modified. And actually, the plan should include implementing actions, but there is no longer this duty. There is change also in terms of sanctions. The sanctions are no longer linked to the worldwide net turnover, and also there is the minimum maximum cap, which was set at 5%, is eliminated. So there will be, of course, further harmonization, further collaboration with member states to have certain rules in place, how to implement these penalties, and so there is some kind of harmonization kept. And I already mentioned the civil liability. So not only the subconditions of civil liability which were outlined and harmonized have been removed, so it's left to the member states level, but also the representative action was deleted. So if this is all implemented, the estimation is that actually we will save 6.3 billion per year, which is quite important sum, and while still keeping the objectives there, and actually making it probably easier also for companies who have some kind of resistance to move on and to go step by step and recognize that this is a process of constant improvement. I will leave it here. Of course, I guess there will be several questions or more on the content, but I think broadly I outlined the changes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. And I think that was a very comprehensive overview of the core changes that you've been promoting. And as you say, this very much relates to the efforts that the Commission is now making in relation to a more competitive environment for industry to work in. There haven't been any questions yet coming up from the audience, and I would like to remind the audience that they are free to post questions in the Q&A box at the top there. You can just click on the Q&A, and yeah, do feel free to drop us a couple of lines. I would like to follow up with you just a couple of points there, Alexandra. I know you need to leave at 11, so if I can, if I'll abuse my role as moderator, just to pick you up on a couple of points. And I think the first thing that I'm interested in is how you see the simplification exercise supporting both the goal to have a resilient and ethical supply chain for critical raw materials, but also at the same time safeguarding competitiveness in the EU. And this was a package that was launched not more than a couple of years ago, and so I'm just interested in how you see now, when we had the Green Deal, this was launched now with competitiveness, we are changing things slightly. Are we still able to say that we are making sure we have resilient and ethical supply chains and also safeguarding competitiveness?
I think the objective is not to remove the regulations. So we still keep transparency, we still due diligence obligations. So the values of ethical sourcing are still there. There was no change to material scope, if you can see in the due diligence. So we still have all the human rights and environmental issues covered as they were before. We just want to make it really feasible. So for me, this is something which doesn't go away, where the European values still stay. We have also a clean industrial deal. So, the Green Deal is linking it to how to mix these two together and how to actually ensure decarbonization while ensuring also that, EU market has ethical and responsible sourcing, and the transparency of the value chains and knowing, with whom you are, who you have in your supply chain, actually helps also for the resilience and for the, adaptation when there is any kind of disruptions or any kind of problem. So I think the objectives are still there and they are not moving away.
Indeed, I think as a sector that prides itself on indeed having supply chains that are very transparent and indeed very resilient and covered by due diligence, we can understand, but also, of course, welcoming the efforts that you're making to make things simpler for us. And I've had 2 questions come in. So, Alexander, I hope you can just stay to answer a couple of questions for us. So Lenka, who is ESG manager, development manager, has come to ask, we haven't covered the taxonomy today, but it's more of a question about an update on it, and maybe, she's asking what is the situation regarding the taxonomy, because there have been, of course, the stop the clock, as you mentioned, for CSRD and CSDDD. Has there been any official postponement or statement related to it that you're aware of?
I'm not an expert on taxonomy, so I can direct Lenka to our colleagues who deal with it, because I was not following that part of the work on our side. But of course, if she wants me to put her in contact with others, I'm happy to do so.
Yes, indeed. And I understand that. And Lenka, honestly, today we were focusing on CSDDD and CSRD. And I think, I just wanted to check, Alexander, if you knew anything about it, because it was more of a process question. But okay, then we'll go to Tessa Quant, who is asking about whether or not there has been any assessment of the harmonization for due diligence obligations in the battery regulation and the CSDDD, because they are slightly different requirements. And has there been any look, before we expect feedback on this, has there been any review of this? Are you aware of any such thing in DG Grow?
Yes, that's this DG Grow, that's our domain, so I'm more aware of this, of course. We did several analyses of this in different stages of the process. Of course, the Omnibus came very quickly in, because there is actually even a review clause in the battery regulation to assess whether it's compatible with CSDD. But now the scope of CSDD is changing. Of course, we are still in the co-legislative process. So the only thing which we know is that the stop the clock has been approved 3rd of April. So this is something which is confirmed, but the rest of the content of the Omnibus will be part of the negotiation. So, we know that Parliament should only have their position in October. So there will be no trilogue negotiations before that. So it's difficult to say now, whether it will be aligned or not aligned with the CSDD. We know that which are the discrepancies. Maybe what I can say that there will be yet another omnibus coming next week, where we will propose postponement of the battery regulation by 2 years. So it will also get some extra time, and and probably also to address the interconnections with the guidelines. And besides the omnibus, and I think this is important from our agenda here, what I wanted to mention, that we not only work on this regulatory simplification, we also try to see what other measures we can put in place from the user-driven perspective. What kind of tools the companies need, what kind of, how to use digital tools and so on. But also what we are thinking of presenting is sort of a one handbook of guidelines, or some kind of a glossary which explains the interactions, which really takes the company perspective. What am I supposed to do when I need to apply this and this and this in parallel? So this is something which is extremely important for us. And at the same time, we are trying to also work more on the incentive-driven approach. So I think one thing is simplification through regulation, but then we also try to see how we can simplify the life of companies through different support measures or sort of code of conducts on data sharing, or also how we can incentivize companies. You were asking about this, are we still keeping the objectives? Are we still ensuring that it's ethical? I think it's important that they also, the companies, see the business case in it besides the, obligations which they get.
And I get that. And then a way you're sort of describing as a sort of instruction manual for how to do the due diligence to help companies to understand how to align with processes in parallel. Just confirm then there will be a postponement for the battery regulation that you think will be proposed in the next week or so, putting back the obligations by 2 years so that there's a chance for the alignment to take place through the current legislative proposal of the Omnibus Package 1. So we can see how that plays out and then try to get the batteries regulation in line with what we have. Is that the thinking that you have in DG Grow?
I mean, our thinking is always to keep coherence, simplicity, remove the complexity really of this, and to have a holistic approach. And personally speaking, I mean, this is not to be quoted. I think it's a bit missed opportunity that we didn't have Omnibus on due diligence only, where we would put all the due diligence legislations together. Of course, it makes a lot of sense to link CSRD and CSDD, but I think there are more. We have identified probably 9 or 10 legislations which interact with each other, not only on due diligence, but I think it would make sense to have one set of rules for due diligence, at least to align the core processes, to align the terminology, and this is something what we want to address in this glossary or handbook of guidelines. That's why we are, when I speak about this, I'm not speaking about CSRD and CSDD only, but really having this holistic approach and on the cumulative burden and cumulative obligations. So.
I'm happy to hear that, and indeed, thanks for those clarifications. I did note very well. So you're allowed to have your own opinion as well, so just not to be in trouble with your hierarchy. Alexandra, thanks very much for joining us today. If you can stay for a few minutes, please do. I'm going to turn over to our expert panel, maybe to comment a little bit on the points that you've made, but also to put forward their own points of view on the Omnibus package. Great appreciation. I didn't miss your question, but it's about the CBAM, and I know Alexandra won't be able to answer it because CBAM, of course, is dealt with in other Directorate Generals. But I would like to invite Manuela, if Manuela Ramirez and Sophie Grenard and Andre Marcu would like to turn on their cameras. I will go in the order of Manuela, of course, representing the industry, representing Atlantic Copper, a very important member of Eurometaux. And then Sophie, I will come to you to put forward the point of view of the trade unions. And then finally, Andre, I'll come to you to hear your view as a think tank working on this in Brussels. Manuela, thanks so much for joining us this morning. We're really pleased that you could be here. And we'd be very happy to hear your views, the views of industry on the Omnibus package proposal, and maybe a couple of off-the-cuff remarks of what you've heard this morning from Alexandra. That would be great. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and James, thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my views on the Omnibus, which are fully aligned with the Eurometaux position. As an industry, as a company, we welcome the proposal and fully, support and understand the reasons, the rationale behind the Commission's decision to launch, such a proposal. For example, the fact that this proposal is focusing on reducing disproportionate regulatory burden, which is what the previous or the directives were imposing to us, and also reducing compliance costs. Is well appreciated. And at the same time, we believe that it maintains the objective of the directives. In the case of the CSDDD, the objective is to improve sustainability reporting, and in the case of the CSRD, and in CSDDD, which is ensuring that healthy and ethical supply chains for the raw materials that we need for the climate and energy transition. With this by simplification, the requirements, the proposal is safeguarding, is helping to safeguard the competitiveness, which was mentioned by Alexandra before, but it helps to safeguard the competitiveness of the European industry. And if Europe wants to be a leader, if it wants to keep on creating jobs, improve living standards, we need a strong and competitive European, industry, which remains in Europe and exists in Europe. And with this simplification, the approach will allow companies to allocate resources in more efficiently, invest in innovation, create value here and beyond our borders. But if we fail to do this, this discussion won't be taking place here, and it will be in other areas, which we all know that the standards are much, much lower than what we already have in Europe. Also, in our view, despite that we welcome the proposal, it still needs some improvements, some clarifications. One of the points we would like, it was confirmed by Alexandra, but we advocate for maintaining a risk-based approach where companies will prioritize those most severe and likely adverse impacts, because if we go that way, the process of identifying and mitigating them will be much more effective. We want to make meaningful changes, but if we have to focus on an endless number of direct or indirect, mainly indirect business partners, the reality is that that's impractical and unrealistic. We have to consider that our sector, it has complex value chains, and sometimes it's more than thousands of partners. In other cases, for the more largest companies, we can be talking about 100,000, and I think that's it's a reality. It's obvious. We also would like, to seek alignment with the international recognized standards and principles, the OECD, the UNGPs. Why? Because they are globally recognized frameworks. They are the foundation of the best practices, and they will help avoiding different interpretations across the globe. Also, we think that the industry voluntary schemes should be playing a major role and should be recognized. I think the mining and metal sector, we are front runners in these initiatives. We've been implementing them for many, many years, and they are well recognized. They're especially well recognized by the market, whether we talk about the copper moly, zinc mark, the aluminium stewardship initiative, the IRMA. And I think it's a pity. It's been recognized under the conflict. The idea is that they are recognized under the conflict minerals regulation. So I think it's also, a pity that if we don't do it, with this. Another point of utmost important for us is which is harmonization, and it has to occur at two levels. Alexandra mentioned that, which has been, great to listen, the harmonization. She mentioned the batteries regulation, but it's not only that, it's the forced labor, it's the conflict minerals, and we can't afford reporting differently depending on the regulation we are looking at, because most of our companies, we fall under all of them. So I think, and for me, this is a perfect example of, a burden created, which could be easily, I would say, avoided. And the second level of harmonization, it would be across member states, which just to ensure that we reach a level playing field within the EU. And just to conclude my intervention, I would like to mention a couple of points on the CSRD, which is, the reduction of the data points. I think it's a must. We have to focus on what is really important, what is making a difference, why, that information is relevant for the stakeholders, rather than trying to cover everything. Also, we should avoid, or it should be avoided, the duplication of information. In the case, for example, of emissions, we are reporting them under the Industrial Emissions Directive, ETS, EMAS, pollutant release and transfer. Again, it's just reporting the same in different formats, which is not creating, a cost for us. It's also for the stakeholders, which have to digest it. And the last point will be the double materiality principle exercise. I think all companies, we've gone through that exercise. I think the general consensus is that is quite challenging. It's difficult to understand. And I think it's, if we want to be effective, and it's okay, well, let's focus on or clarify, how to carry it out. And I think with that, I will end my intervention.
Thank you, Manuela. Thank you. And indeed, I appreciate it. And it's always good to recall also the global standards of which we're also living to, but also our commitment to making sure that we are supporting the objectives here, but they are proportionate. And I think that's the word that I would take out from what you're saying. We want a proportionate approach to what we can actually do. And indeed, Europe is the leading place for standards that relate to this. So thank you. I would like to ask Sophie to take the floor. Sophie, I think you've heard from the European Commission. You've now heard from industry as well. It's possible that you have different views. I read the press, I suppose everyone else does. And that's indeed why you're here today, because we would like to hear your view. I think it's important that we have those kind of good working relationships and dialogue between the different sectors that make up our own sector. Of course, we work closely together with you on many other points. But how are you all seeing this in industrial? How are the trade unions feeling about what has been changed? And I noted from some of the slides there are certain elements that relate directly to you in the change that Alexandra presented. So please, I'll give you your 5 minutes, 5-6 minutes, to be fair, for Manuel also had that. But yeah, 5-6 minutes, that would be great. And then we'll move into questions, because some questions are coming in, and please do keep bringing the questions in, dear audience. Thank you. Over to you, Sophie.
Thank you very much, James, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for inviting me. It's truly a valuable opportunity for us as trade union to share our views on these developments. And even if, as you said already, Jamie, it's a bit divergent maybe. So thanks to Eurometaux for the good discussion and opportunity to create a real dialogue with divergent opinion on this topic. So maybe for those who do not know Industrial Europe, we are a trade union federation at EU level representing national trade unions and among 7 million workers in mining, energy and manufacturing industry. So we represent the workers all along many global value chains, textile, chemical, battery, automotive or other metal industries. And we represent specifically the interest of European workers, but we are also, of course, working very closely with Industrial Global, which is representing workers worldwide. It's like our sister organization, and we are currently running a specific project on due diligence. We try to develop recommendations to really also help and equip workers and the union representatives to engage into effective human rights due diligence action plans. So yeah, as you can imagine, we really strongly support mandatory due diligence framework and regulation, as for us, they can really help to mitigate the risks for the workers across the world. And yeah, for us, the due diligence regulation is not about red tapes or like administrative burdens, because they really ensure security, but also a level playing field, and they really contribute to identify as you said, environmental and social risk, but also the opportunities in the operation and value chains of the companies. And we really think that clear data, concrete targets, and concrete actions can really provide more guarantees that the risk will be avoided. And we are sure that social sustainability, when supported by mandatory due diligence, can really create loyalty, but also productivity and innovation within the workforce. And it can be maybe a good way also to attract, but also to retain the talent and the workers that are needed in the company, especially maybe in the metal companies. We also think, but this probably everyone knows that already, that at the same time it's also reduce the risk of reputation loss. It can also reduce social and environmental fines and the reputational damage from negative attention into public opinion. So that's also something important. It's also shows that sustainability policies and reporting that are along with that can really have a positive effect on long-term growth. Build resilient value chains, also triggers data-driven and targeted approach, which is super important for us. But for that to happen, our view is that we need mandatory tools. Voluntary standard will not be enough, unfortunately, for what we have seen until now. And what I wanted to say is that with the different due diligence tools that have been put on the table at EU level in the previous mandate, we have very much welcomed this shift from voluntary to mandatory due diligence, also with the inclusion of union and trade union representatives at every stage of the process, which was something which was very much important for us when it comes to workers' risk. Because I just wanted also to recall that we still identify some specific risks that could be addressed in the sectors that we are representing. For example, in the mining sector, we are still facing a strong sector's reliance on subcontracting. We still see prevalence of hazardous materials, health and safety problems. Also, sometimes right suppression in some countries that make workers really vulnerable to abuses. So I'm just recalling that to explain that there were clear reasons behind this mandatory due diligence initiative taken at EU level. This is not something coming just to annoy everyone. It's really coming from a ground reality, I would say. So my tone maybe will be a bit more critical on the omnibus package, of course, because we are not really welcoming this proposal. For us, it's really a big loss because it will water down the objective of the due diligence agenda at EU level. It will cover less companies, also reduce the civil liability opportunities that was presented by Alexandra before. It will also reduce the scope. So for us, it will really dismantle the key provisions and also some of the objectives of the CSDDD, for example. It will also probably make it more toothless because we will have a delay in the implementation, into the application. It will probably weaken the enforcement. This is a risk that we identify as well. And it will, at the end, limit corporate responsibility to only direct business partners, which is maybe not ideal, as we, usually when you go deeper into the supply chain, you see more risks. So this is what I wanted to say about that. And also we regret the process in which these omnibuses, because now we will have others, are decided. We feel it's a bit opaque and rather undemocratic because there was no impact assessment, but rather like a kind of arbitrary consultation. So this we think that could be improved that's not something that we support. But maybe I am going to the end of my speech, James. It's very much important that you also all understand that we are not opposing simplification at all. But responsible business conduct should be at the essence of this debate, we think. Because if, for example, that you mentioned also, Manuela, EU legal frameworks like CSRD, CSDDD, deforestation regulation, EU battery regulation have overlaps. And this can be clarified without lowering the standards or lowering the scope. So also something we think should be reinforced is the guidance that will be given at EU level. They should be developed. We should support companies to go towards this due diligence goal. And this will be essential to implement the legal frameworks on company level. So for us,
Yeah, so thank you, Sophie. I was going to say, if you could just wrap up, that'd be great.
Yeah, of course. No, just in conclusion, we think that mandatory due diligence is really the cornerstone of the responsible business conduct. It will really help to address human rights and environmental risks. So probably I will be able to develop further in the debate. I will stop here, James.
Yes, I think we are running a little bit out of time, and I do need to bring Andre in. But yeah, thanks again. As I say, we don't always have the same view, Sophie, but we're always happy to hear your view, and then also let us reflect and think about our own point of view. We probably would think about this as a way that we'd say that maybe the original proposal was going too far and we should go step by step. We also recognize, you said, of course, there are overlaps that need to be addressed, but I think that in principle there's probably room for us to discuss and move forward. Andre, I would like to come to you last but by no means least. Very interested to hear what you and your members are thinking about the Omnibus package, perhaps from a less polarized way, and I don't polarize in a bad way, but in the sense that we have for and against, if you like. And how is the ERCST looking at the Omnibus package? Andre, please. I'm going to have to try and hold you to 5 minutes so we can answer some of the questions. And audience, please do continue to ask questions. We will get there. We have another 20 minutes or so. So please, Andre, the floor is yours.
Yeah, James. First, sorry to say this. Yes, we do have members, but they're not like your members, because our members are members because we have to have an ASBL, but we do not represent any of our members. We represent ourselves. Just so I would say in a trading language that these two people that were before me talk their book. I don't have a book. I have 15 computers and I don't have a book. So I'm going to talk more from a principal point of view. Now, which some may like or some may not like. Now, one thing that you said, I really like what you said, is Europe is the leading place for standards. Well, I wish that Europe was the leading place for production, industrial production. That would be my first say. The second thing is, you have to understand, and I'm talking to Sophie now, is I come from Rio 92. I'm not sure you were born at that time, but I come from Rio 92, where the Framework Convention and the Biodiversity Foundation and the Desertification Foundation were put in place. And the Earth Council and so on. So I'm on two minds. On one side, there is my social conscience. And that social conscience is the fact that Europe is championing ethical and sustainable approaches to production, consumption, and living. And we can all only applaud that. But there's a second part to my mind, and that second part to my mind is that I also come from Rio, and sustainable development was defined as a prerogative of the host country, of a developing country. And developing countries, starting from Brazil, South Africa, India, China, and everybody else, are very, very strong on the fact that this is a prerogative of developing countries. So these are two things that come to mind. The second part of it is simplification. Yes, simplification will take you so far, but simplification, and you have correctly put it, I think Alexandra spoke, the thing is still here. We haven't moved anything. The principles are there, and this, that, and the other thing. Yes. But so what does this mean? It means that you're basically postponing the inevitable by 2 years. So it's whatever happens, okay, it's not going to happen for Manuela now. It's going to happen in 2 years from now. I don't know what you're going to do in 12, Manuela. I know what I'm going to do in 2 years. But I can tell you that it's still going to happen. Now, these are the fundamentals that there are important. Now, competitiveness, and I come back now to the Antwerp Declaration, the European Industrial Deal, Green Industrial Deal. These were things that were put in place. Why were they put in place, James? Because if you read the Financial Times yesterday, 80%, apparently, I don't know about this, but that's what I read in the paper, 80% of the chemical industry in the EU has put its assets up for sale because they think they're not competitive and they cannot do business here anymore. And it's not about, it is about energy prices, it's about regulation, it's about this, that, and the other thing. You know this, you come from a business background, you don't make a decision based on one thing, you make a decision made on multiple factors, and every little bit counts. So competitiveness is important if you want to have an industrial Europe, if you have industrial trade unions. But also, where I come from, in competitiveness, you will be competitive and be able to be the leading place for standards if you have an industrial base. The rest is an illusion. I mean, making beds in Italy in hotels and selling football teams is a great story, but it's not going to take us very far. So unless we manage to keep the economic power and the industrial power of Europe, it's not something that we're going to last us very much. Coming back to the fact this is a general thing because we're a think tank. At the same time, we recognize that what the Commission has made is a very delicate balancing act. The balancing act is that there's a constituency that thinks that this is an important thing to do, and we support this. What we don't support is the imposition on third countries. We don't support that. End of story. But we do understand the fact that the Commission had a very difficult act to maintain the balance and ensure that the key fundamental issues are still in place, while at the same time trying to make sure that Manuela and her colleagues and the gas and all the other people are not living in Europe. So they have struck a balance. Now, I take an issue with stop the clock. Stop the clock means that you stop something and you reconsider. In this case, you have not reconsidered anything, you're just postponing. So if you really have a serious problem with this, I think that the honest thing to do is to actually stop the clock and look at the whole thing again and see what exactly it is that we need to have, in what form we have. Because I'm very much with Sophie. I think that the way a lot of these things, the whole Fit for 55 package was introduced, was not horribly democratic. It was pushed through the COVID era. And now, and Sophie, maybe you like part of it, but now, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Now, what you have is you have the same thing being, some of them taken back through also through a process that's not horribly transparent. So I think that we should all be careful because while substance is important, process is very, very important as well. And again, we didn't like the first part. We don't really necessarily like the second part. But in principle, I think the Commission has done what it could. In the end, James, I think this is a political decision, and there are political masters. There's the council, there's the parliament, there's this, that, and the other thing, who's going to stand up, be counted. And this is where we'd like to see, some political leadership really not kind of taking this thing by the bull by the horns and making very hard decisions. Not sure to answer all your questions, but I try to give you a think tank point of view.
And I really appreciate it, Andre, as well. Of course, it is different from the industry of the union, so it is a kind of middle ground as well in its own special way. And of course, looking at the bigger context, which I think we also have to take in. I actually really appreciate the way you linked the process problem, which actually we probably have experienced for quite a while now in Brussels. And unfortunately, Alexandra's gone. But yeah, I mean, things like what you said about the battery stop the clock, it was news to me. Probably people in my team are aware of it, but for me, it's not. I don't remember being consulted on this particularly. So yeah, this to me is all, and we should be, because we are the metals that are being used to make batteries. But okay, we put that to one side. There are good questions that have come in, and I'm going to choose questions and just give them to one of you at a time. We'll do one question each, and then I have one general question, and I think we have enough time to finish on that point. The first one has come from Patrice Chrisman. I'm going to go to you, Manuela, and just ask. Basically, I'm going to change this question a little bit, but say, do the omnibus proposals foster enough trust among stakeholders to attract investment in our industry, in our metals industry? In a way, I see it as a kind of question saying, will it make a difference to be able to get enough stakeholders, probably including finance, banks, insurance, and others? Will it help what they've done to bring more investment here? How do you see that from an industry point of view?
I think, I would like to clarify that we, as an industry, we want transparency. We are not escaping for the due diligence obligation or the reporting obligations at all. I think it's important to have in mind that, when we are the first, interested party in just doing ethical business. It's like going to, choosing the right financial, partner, which is financially healthy. We don't want to engage with a company that in 3 months' time it will be disappear. So get investment. I think, it's already there. I think financial actors, they are with CSDDD, without CSRD, they are requesting information. So for me, and again, we are working on those voluntary initiatives, which we are already, well, proving what we are doing. If we look at the LME, for example, we can't put any material under the LME warehouse, or we cannot keep the registration of our commodities unless we prove that we are doing, we fulfill with sustainability criteria. So I think, it's in my view, it's CSDDD, CSRD, okay, fine, but look at what we already are doing, and should be enough in my view to for them to assure that we are right, we are in the right path. I don't know if it answers the question.
I think it gives an answer on a point of view of how we actually see things going forward. I do want to get then on to you, Sophie, and ask you another question which came in from Patrice Chrisman. And again, I'll reword it slightly because it's basically asking about the role of China. And of course, China is the almighty competitor. I just used the exact word that was used by Patrice. I found this interesting. And they are talking about labour, of course, in this. He is talking about labour in this question. And I think that, from our point of view, it would be interesting to see how you see it. Do you think the Omnibus package is helping industry to be able to compete, or do you see other important elements that need to change? And I ask that because, of course, you're representing the workers and their jobs depend on us being competitive. So is there an issue in the way that we are addressing competitiveness, and that the first piece of legislation that we've got to try and boost competitiveness is the Omnibus package? Is that the right way, or do you see other issues that need to be addressed in a more urgent fashion? Please, Sophie.
Yeah, thank you, James. I think you already replied to the question by asking it, because, of course, for us, it's not simplification that will help to have more competitiveness at EU level. We really need more action when it comes to the industrial policy at EU level. We need action on energy cost. We need action on investment support. There is so many things to do, and for the moment, there is currently some plan on the table: the Steel and Metal Action Plan, the Automotive Action Plan, etc., to try to really address the problem of the competitiveness of EU industries. And for us, we should absolutely have the focus on those different aspects and the concrete industrial plans that are currently discussed, rather than trying to maybe lower the regulation in other parts. And the second thing linked to this question is when we are saying that there is cheap labor in China, opaque ESG practices, this means that we need mandatory due diligence, and also try to, in a way, have protection about the way we are doing stuff in Europe. And maybe at our borders, we also have to use these kind of tools to try to increase our standards outside of Europe. This is exactly what we want due diligence, to help trade unions outside of Europe to use this tool to raise and increase their social standards in their countries. So for us, it's a good tool to increase all the social and also environmental standards outside of Europe, and that could really help to then compete on those production aspects, I would say.
So that's very helpful, and I appreciate that. I think there are many elements that we would see alongside you that need to be addressed. And it is a question also that goes into the mind, I think, of my members as well, why the Omnibus package came first when there are much more urgent things. But then there is the balance of power between how much can you do with the Affordable Energy Action Plan compared to what member states would need to do, because things like levies and charges are there. So there is always this sort of discussion about how much can we expect to come in from Brussels. But I take your points, and again, thank you for that. I would like to ask you, Andre, about a question that we've also received that has come in from Roman Tiblin, which is basically saying that we need to involve Indigenous peoples as stakeholders because they are right holds for mining and the energy transition. Do you think the Omnibus proposal that has come through is doing enough to protect rights of people beyond the shores of Europe, or perhaps Indigenous groups also within Europe? Or do you think that it's been taken too far in the direction of competitiveness? How do you see it? And you're on mute. Sorry to say, Andre. You've been kind enough to be on mute, but you need to come off.
I don't know. I'm indigenous from Romania too, so I don't know what is indigenous, but okay. Look, I think I remember a discussion in one of the COPs. I know COPs because that's where I go do climate change. And so I went and remember the COPs and the Bolivian delegate kind of came and it was all a supporter, a defender of the native lands, of the native people and the Aboriginal people and so on. And what took everybody to task until the Colombians stood up and said, well, we also represent having our country about, I don't know, 30 native tribes. So I mean, I think that to lecture people as to how they do things in their own country, it is going to be the way I learn it, and again, going back to 30 years of experience, is going to be the end of sustainable development. Once you start to impose sustainable development as your standard on the world, it is not going to work very well. It will work well in the short term, but it's not going to work well in the long term because people will resist this. And what you see here now, what you see the reaction to trade disputes and others, including deforestation, including all kind of other standards, is a very strong reaction from 3/4 of humanity to somebody trying to impose standards on them. So you do have this reality that Europe is being seen right now as being very preachy, as being trying to explain to the rest of the world how they should live their lives. Now, I understand the point of view of the fact that we have certain standards in Europe, health, labor, environment, and so on. But we didn't like when the US was the gendarme of the world, or Tsar Nicholas or the gendarme of Europe. And I think that people are not liking supremely much that Europe is the gendarme of trying to impose sustainability standards on the rest of the world. This is not a very popular point of view, James, but it is. I was in Brasilia months ago at the meeting of the BRICS and explaining to them about CBAM. I mean, that I got a half-hour lecture from the head of delegation of one of the very large countries saying, who the hell do you think you are to tell me I represent half of humanity? So you have to take these things into account. And this is why I say this is a very, very delicate balance that the Commission is trying to, and I don't envy them for that. They're trying to kind of make sure that the standards and the fundamentals stay in place while recognizing that they're running into increasing opposition around the world.
Thanks, Andre, for that. And I also know you, and I know you well. And I know you do believe very strongly in the rights of people to have their voices and voices heard. So I would also add that to your point. But I get your point about us sort of like not trying to be neo-colonial in some way or other, which I think many people would also appreciate. We still have enough time. We've got 10 minutes. I think that in principle, we'll take Raymond Philippe's question, which is basically saying that if it would not be from a strong omnibus position, why would the financial sector prefer investing in Europe for mining and metals compared to other regions? And I would just ask each of you to briefly respond to that, and any other sort of final takeaway point you would like to have, that would be very welcome. So Manuela, you start with you. Sorry, Manuela, then Sophie, and then Andre. We'll finish in that order. But I think it's a good final question to say, how does the Omnibus package relate to the financial sector and its preference for investing in Europe? And does the Omnibus package help us to get investment compared to other regions? And as I say, any other final point you want to make as we are heading towards the end of the webinar? Please, Manuela, you go first. I'll just put it up so you can see it better. There you are.
Yeah, thank you, James. I think, what the Omnibus is doing is, well, simplifying. The obligations are still there, and simplification doesn't mean no action. So we support that. When investments here in Europe or somewhere, they are following, ethical, criteria. No one is going to invest in here or in another parts or in Western world without having, credibility, without, sound information. I don't see, that Omnibus is not a question of companies or banks don't invest in here or not. It's more related to the damage that the burden causes to the European industry and the sector. Is not but again, no one is saying I don't want to report, I don't want to do a due diligence. It's more focusing on what really gives value to those to any to stakeholders. It's the European Central Bank. It issued a note, I think it's been last week, saying that well-calibrated sustainability reporting supports the EU objectives and of course the objectives for the finance sector. So my view, it's not it's not contradictory, and it's yep.
That's fine. Thank you, Manuela. Sophie.
Yes, maybe just what I wanted to insist on is that maybe the Omnibus is not tackling the exact challenges of simplification, because as I said, first, we are, as a trade union movement, we are for simplification, but we think the EU should then prioritize other targets, such as like the overlap between regulation, but also creating good guidance and create tools that could really help companies to report, etc. Because of course, as you said, Manuela, maybe this will not lower reporting, etc. But in a way, reducing the scope at the end will reduce the objective of due diligence. Maybe not for you, but for other companies. So that's the thing that we wanted to mention. And maybe the last thing I wanted also to mention is that we think that there is currently little evidence that the estimated reduced reporting costs for companies will really increase their competitiveness, because it's solely based on cost without balancing the benefits. So for that, maybe that could also be really helpful to have more information and have this perspective when addressing the simplification and reduce reporting methods and proposals.
Thank you very much, Sophie. And Andre, again, last but no means least,
yeah,
please.
I think you said the right word, proportionality. I think that there's got to be a proportionality in what you put forward, because you do not live in an isolated world. You do live in a world that there are different standards, different people with different ways of doing business, and there is a proportionality. And in general, Europe is much more regulated, much more social. I mean, we all know that, and that's a choice that the continent has made. But how can I argue against human rights and environmental disclosure? And this is crazy. Nobody's going to do that. But the one thing that you got to think about is that there's the camel and the straw. And there's a point where, additional regulation, no matter how well intended it is, it will break the back of the camel. And I understand and totally sympathize with Sophie. I was a union member in my youth, so I understand very well. But there's also the fact that you're going to have a job for your members as well. And that's a point where this is where the proportionality balance comes into play.
Thanks, Andre. Proportionality is a word that I like to use because I think that it reflects the fact that we know that we need to have a certain amount of regulation, but we still need to be able to do business, to employ the people that would also be then represented by Sophie, and also to contribute to the economy. I think I will wrap up the proceedings here. I think we've answered all the questions that came in from the panel, from the audience, and I think I have to say thanks to the panel for that. I would just say a couple of points just to finish off. I think that, as indeed Manuela said, we do support the simplification process that has come from the Omnibus package. It is not the case that we have everything our own way. We still face challenges like double materiality, and I think that this is obviously a relatively controversial part of the continuing discussion. And indeed, we would look at that from a proportionality point of view as to what are we really getting from that extra complexity and challenge that we have to overcome. The sector, of course, remains entirely committed to sustainability reporting, and we do so. We have a number of initiatives, whether it be the marks that were also mentioned earlier, or whether you look at the OECD and other frameworks. And I think we would definitely see the need to align more in Europe with the existing benchmarks. And okay, we also are indeed respecting European law. When you talk about conflict minerals, you talk about forced labor. These are things that the companies are already making sure, and I'm happy and proud to make sure that we are implementing effectively. So yeah, I think that we would say when the original package came out, we recognized this as an excessive burden for us. And you have to take the competitive context that we are living in. As you mentioned, Sophie, the energy prices, the international trade element, which we simply can't overlook, the overcapacities that are built in certain metals in India or China or other parts, Middle East. These are all significant threats to our viability here in Europe. And I think that we therefore have to say, if they can help with a small step, which will reduce some of the burden on us, it will help us to gain and improve our competitiveness so that we can be attractive and bring more people into our sector. And I do think that overall we are supportive of the regime, but we do just need to see that level of, and I think simplification is the right word. Manuela and Sophie and Andre have all said that, and I do think that is correct. Yes, Andre, finally, it is great that Europe does lead in regulation. I think Commissioner Fischer once joked to me and said our leading export is regulation. I would tend to agree with you, though. What we should really have pride in is in our industrial base and not only in our export of regulation. We should have both. And in this regard, I think we would all be proud Europeans if we were able to say we had the best and most sustainable regime, which also allowed industry to flourish, because that's what we need. We need a base. I'm not sure that I'm so opposed to people folding beds in Italy. I rather like my holidays in Southern Europe, but I got the point very well. I would like to finish by thanking, of course, everybody. I think it's been a really great panel. Really thanks so much to Manuela and Sophie and Andre. You've all brought unique points to this discussion, which I think the audience have enjoyed and have appreciated. I have to thank the Eurometaux team once again, living to its excellent standards. Great thanks to Diana, Natalia, Martina, and the others for putting this together and working hard in the background to make sure it was good. Great thanks, of course, to Alexandra, who came in and gave us a good overview at the beginning. So appreciate the keynote speaker. And of course, a huge thanks to you, the audience. There will be an opportunity to meet Eurometaux in person on the 25th of June. We'll have our annual conference from 2 p.m. in the Renaissance Hotel. There will be keynote speeches from the Commission and the European Parliament, as well as an assortment of CEOs and highly respected commentators and stakeholders, including one from Industrial. Sophie, you'll be glad to know that Judith Curtin-Darling will be there. And so please do come and join us for that event. If you need more information, drop us a line. In the meantime, I wish you an excellent day, and thank you once again for joining us for the Omnibus Package. What should the metals industry expect? And I wish you all a very good day. Thank you very much.
Thank you.